Lafia, and welcome back to Black Love Free, a spiritual political podcast dedicated to Black spirituality, healing, and Black liberation. I'm your host, Brendan, a Gemini, a reluctant anthropologist, a hoodoo, a student of the Ifa, Orisha, Isheshe tradition, and an energy healer. Girls, gays, theys, and the rest of y'all. It's been way too long, and that's entirely on me. That's my fault. Life been life, and your girl been going through some shit. And to be honest, I am still making my way through it. And I'm finding myself crawling up for air. And I know for so many of you who are listening, that's been the case for you too. So I hope this word blesses you as much as it has blessed me, that this process of reclamation and taking your life back blesses you as much as it blesses me. But I'll tell you this, just as June Jordan said in her essay, Notes Towards a Model of Resistance, I had to find a certain kind of righteous certainty about my motherfucking life in order to be here today, to sit here today, to be here, literally alive and breathing and surviving today. I had to become so certain of the purpose and the sanctity of my life that I won't let no bitch, take it from me. If you're a paid member of our Patreon, you've just heard the full tea. But for everybody else, here's where I'll land. This is my personal journal. I'll be damned if I let this shit kill me or make me regard myself as lesser. Yeah, a bitch might be robbing Peter to pay Paul, but what in the fuck do I look like hating myself over that? What kind of evil work am I choosing to work upon myself through silence, guilt, and shame? Yeah, I might be going through it, TM. I might have messed up in the past and gave my goodness too freely to fools, but I would be lying to myself and spitting on my destiny if I pretended like I have given them everything. Yeah, I may have made some mistakes, fucked the wrong niggas, gave the wrong folks grace, gave away the shirt on my back to somebody who wouldn't piss on me if I were on fire, but who am I to look upon myself? The being conjured from fire, water, clay, and dust, and not give myself some compassion and goodwill. I may have made mistakes, but I survived those too. I'll be damned if I do all this good and refuse to serve myself and live in integrity with myself. I'll be damned to be known as useful and loved and kind to everybody but myself. No, no, I won't keep sacrificing at the altar of daughter, other mother, friend, and languish in my loneliness. I refuse pedestals and I touch my heart when it hurts and whisper, yes, I am still living, still healing, still choosing to survive even when the world I live in insists on my silence, my violation, my death. Yeah, I continue to write, to mourn, to dance, to sing, to fuck, to cry even when I am trudging through the valley of the shadow of death, of betrayal, of loss, of famine, because I know those who sacrificed for me to be here did the same. And while they could not make the way plain or without obstacle, they still hold out their hand to me and say, come, life in all its beauty awaits. This time, all I have to do is survive and change. So here we are, talking about reclamation today. But before we get there, I have a few announcements. Behind the scenes, in addition to the turmoil that the paid Patreon people know about, we've also been resting and working here at Black Love Free. I had intentionally planned to be off June I didn't know July was also going to be in the mix. May and June, we just took those months to rest. And in that time, there have been new developments about Substack. And so we're transitioning off of Substack. We are no longer hosted by Spotify because fuck was real. Am I right? And we're in the process of getting a new logo. We're getting a new website because also fuck Squarespace for charging over $400 a year for a website. So we're moving off of there. We are going to launch this new kind of quote unquote rebrand in the fall, along with our learning, healing, doing community book club. And yeah, to be real, this work is expensive. When I was counting through all the bills that I had to pay, the literal thousands of dollars it takes to do this work with good quality, to have a website, to sell merch, to have equipment, to have the software, to do this, it costs thousands of dollars. And I was funding that out of my pocket for the past few years. But I'm at a place now where it's truly just unaffordable and unsustainable for me. So I'm trying to find ways to let this work continue and let it be sustainable. But that requires your support. You can support our work moving forward in a few ways. But the main way is by becoming a member on our Patreon. So you can become a member for free and you'll have access to everything that you would have access for free on our Substack. And if you decide to join a paid tier, they start at $1 a month. You help us. Becoming a paid member of our Patreon allows me to keep this going without stressing myself out, without having to figure out how to pay for everything. And you'll get to see the podcast on video if that's what you're into, if you want to see me and you want to see the outfit I got on, or, just my facial expressions or whatever, whatever. And you get access to all of our work moving forward. There are lots of great perks for paid members, so be sure to check our Patreon out. And if you're currently a paid subscriber on our Substack and you're listening to this here, you'll receive a code to register for our Patreon and receive your first month off. That way you can make the switch with some ease. I'll put the link to sign up for our Patreon in the description. Today's episode is inspired by my grandmother, who passed away last July. In the midst of my struggles, my clawing my way back up to the surface after what felt like months of drowning in fear and self suppression, my tongue tied in servitude to my enemies, to my loved ones, to others, I came across this quote that I had written down from my flaming sword, my grandmother, Mrs. Brenda Espathe. And years ago, we were talking on the phone. We were doing our usual gossip, our usual Gemini Virgo thing. And she shared with me some wisdom that I never forgot. So I wrote it down in my notes app, and this is what she said. She said, "Your life is yours, just like my life is mine. So whenever you feel like you filled up your time with other people's plans for it, you can always get back there, back to your life being yours." This was her way of telling me to mind my business. At the time, I'm sure I forgot what I had asked her about. But, to mind my business and let her mind hers. She was truly a Virgo in that way. She ain't had too many people in her business. And I'm grateful for her telling me this, because this, along with the stern word from the Orisha and my ancestors, got me pulling myself up out this familiar pit of self-pity and self-sabotage through silence. I had to learn through the tears, the enduring of the anguish, the fucking pain. Like, the only way through this hard time was to speak, was to stick to what I knew to be true about my destiny, to continue to do the work that I'm here to do. and to face my challenges with the courage that my ancestors and my spirits have helped me to cultivate. I was reminded that there is no pain that I faced that I haven't survived. I'm getting the fuck up and taking what's mine. And you, dear listener or viewer, you must take what's yours. Today, we're talking about reclaiming our destinies. No more laying our destinies, our abundance, our blessed lives at the feet of our enemies. We are talking about the process of taking our lives by any means necessary. And we'll explore this by looking at the words, the wisdom of our ancestor Audre Lorde in the Cancer Journals. And of course, we will end with some prompts and affirmations for reflection. So, dear listener, do you feel as if your life and your time, your energy has been taken up by too many others? If so, let me hold your hand. Don't worry, it's clean. Let's go on this journey together and take our lives back. So, we're going to start with a couple breaths as we usually do. We will use these breaths to make room for our own meaning of reclamation. We're going to make room for something new. Breathing in, that's one. And the second, we're going to inhale, that's two. Let's do one more for good measure. So, as usual, we start with the white man definition of things. When I was looking up our word for this episode, reclamation, I went to the Cambridge Dictionary. I said, okay, let me start with them. And what I found to be really interesting was that reclamation actually has a connection to land. And I didn't know this. I guess the American English version, we don't, maybe people use it in this way. I just didn't know it. But one of the definitions of reclamation is the attempt to make land suitable for farming or building, the treatment of waste materials to get something useful from them. According to vocabulary.com, reclamation means rescuing from error and returning to a rightful course. The act of returning something to a former, better state. Reclamation is the act of reclaiming. And so when you look up what reclaim means, to reclaim means to bring back to a preferable manner of living, sound principles, ideas, etc. To recover substances in a pure or usable form from refuse, discarded articles, etc. So to reclaim something means, in a sense, we might use a synonym like to restore it, to bring it back to a former version of itself, a better, purer version of itself. I think the part from the English definition, the white man's definition, that we can hold, right, is this rescuing from error and returning to a rightful course. Reclamation for us as folks who are taking our lives back from empire, taking our lives back perhaps from depression, taking our lives back from fear, taking our lives back from abuse. We are never going to return back to a state of purity, right? We're not returning back to the way things were. Things will never be what they were. But what does it mean to think about reclamation then as rescuing ourselves from error and returning to a rightful course, returning perhaps to our destinies, to think of ourselves as land or ground that we can make suitable again for growth, right? For building something new. Perhaps we were growing other people's things, sowing other people's corn in the fertile ground of our own bodies and spirits and minds. What does it mean to take it back and to make ourselves suitable for building or growing what we want, what we desire? The other interesting thing about reclamation is that the etymology of the word moved several places. So it's Middle English, from Old French, from Latin reclamare, which means to cry out against. So that root of that word, reclamation, means to literally disturb the status quo, to cry out against what is happening in order to restore. And so when we hold that, right, we can understand reclamation to be a process that does not happen silently. It is not something that also doesn't happen without some kind of shaking up, some kind of violence. So we've got that definition. We got the things we can hold, the things that we might shake from that. But I want us to also turn to the wisdom of our ancestral traditions to think about how reclamation can be possible. Because if we're sitting in a European, white supremacist, anti Black, anti African worldview, right, reclamation is really something that might seem to be impossible. I want to start with Marimba Ani's Let the Circle Be Unbroken. She lays out for us what we must reclaim by talking about what we've lost, and then moves to that process of reclamation, the strength required in that for us as African descendant people. It's important for us to consider reclamation alongside an African and ancestral worldview of time, energy, spirit, and force. Why? Because European knowledge systems sustain the current world in which we live through binaries, through these zero sum games. I win, you lose. There's no space in between, right? This kind of black white binary, and through vacuums, right? So I take all of it, you have none of it. The idea of complete and total possession and property is a European worldview and value. In this European understanding of the world, in their knowledge systems, right? Time, space, and spirit are linear and finite, right? You have one life. You either get saved by Jesus and go to heaven, or you don't and you die and you go to hell. Once you are damned, you are condemned for eternity. There is no redemption or even reclamation of a former life. There is complete separation and distinction between the human, the animal, the divine, between heaven and earth. And they are constructed as binaries in this worldview. So, as we think about reclamation and we think about what's possible, if we bought too much into the European worldview, we would say there is no way for us to get back what's ours, to reclaim what's ours. Once we have separated and sinned and made our mistake, there is no going back. There is no writing the course and removing the error. So we eschew that, right? And the shame and guilt that comes with that for an African worldview. And in Let the Circle Be Unbroken, Marimba Ani clearly lays out the difference between this African worldview and the European worldview. And that is what we'll hold at the center of our ritual of reclamation. And she says, in the African worldview, the human and the divine are not hopelessly separated, as they are in European theology, where the divine is defined as being the negation of all that is human. It requires a miracle for them to interact. In Africa, the human is divine, and the demonstration of this unity is the height of spiritual experience, as the spirits manifest themselves in us through spirit possession. To the African, the sacred and the profane are close and can be experienced as unity. All of this is so because of the multidimensional nature of the African universe. Phenomena and events are understood on many different levels at once. The African universe is alive and rich. It is filled with myriad possibilities. It is a phenomenal universe. The African worldview is spiritual. All that is real is conceived of in terms of spirit. Spirit is the foundation of all being, rendering the universe sacred. Through association with this sacred universe, divinely created, life itself becomes sacred and a most precious gift to be cherished, preserved, passed on, and revitalized. It is to be lived to its fullest. According to Leonard Barrett, the supreme value in terms of the African worldview is to quote, to live life robustly, end quote. That is, to live life with as much energy and as forcefully as we can. Much of African spiritual activity, therefore, involves the attempt to strengthen our force vitale or life force. And it is our spirits, our ancestors, that allow us to strengthen our life force. And we are in deep connection with them. There is no us without them, and there's no them without us, as opposed to a kind of European God that is bad all by himself, honey. He don't give a fuck about his creation, can smite them and just make more. This is at the center of an African worldview and spirituality that is at the center of life. And so if we understand the purpose of life is to live life and to live it well, to live it robustly, we can separate that life from the European conception of the purpose of life, right? That capitalist ascension, the accumulation of property, right? And that property being bodies in addition to land, in addition to money, in addition to things, all of these material aspects of it, right? We begin to think differently about the purpose of our life and the true meaning of survival. We are not surviving to be exploited again. We are not merely surviving to endure another series of oppressions. Survival, life, and the pursuit of a robust life in alignment with our destinies becomes a beautiful, sacred goal in and of itself. And we've talked about this in our workshops in the past, where we talked about reclamation and taking back our lives, our time, our energy, our spirit from empire is a practice of simply recognizing our energy, where it's flowing, where it's going, recognizing that just because we have given our time and our energy to an oppressor, to an oppressor's institution, doesn't mean that it's used and spent up and gone forever. If we incorporate an African worldview of the continuous motion of life through a counterclockwise circle as opposed to a line with finite points, right, we understand that all we need to do to reclaim ourselves, our lives, the sanctity of our life, the beauty of our life, the sacredness of our life is simply to recall our energy back. Marimba Ani also does a great job of helping us really distinguish between African worldview and European worldview in the ways that European worldview has created the world in which we trudge to survive through today. And she says, the African worldview is characterized by unity, harmony, spirituality, and organic interrelationship. The European worldview is characterized by compartmentalization, isolation, separation, control, power relationships, conflict, tension, materialism, a de-spiritualized universe, and mechanical, non-organic relationship. As a result, traditional African society is a microcosm of the natural cosmic environment in which people are actively and intimately involved and with which they identify. whereas European society is an unnatural order seeking only technological efficiency and control. It takes form within an artificially materialized universe in which people experience painful alienation, both from the modes in which they are forced to function, the disconnection of rigid bureaucracy, and from each other. And because the European worldview is as such, it removes the spirit from the world, you're able to destroy the land upon which you live to have AI data centers. You're able to destroy other people because they are not spirit beings that are connected to sacred life that is in everything. They are natural resources to be used. She poses an interesting question at the end of this section where she says, we must raise again the question of what happens when the spiritual ethos of a people of African origin is entrapped, injured, abused, raped, and exploited by an oppressive, materialistic society, the culture of which seeks to dominate them. Do we lose our integrity? Does our ethos and worldview become distorted so that we are no longer recognizable as African? Do we indeed become imitation Europeans? There's some people who would love to do that. Or is it possible that a legacy of powerful spiritual conceptions, the African worldview, and spiritness, the African asili, give us the ability to revitalize ourselves in spite of great suffering and imminent devastation? Is it possible that our souls are continuously replenished by Ntu, the universal life force, through the connecting life rituals that we recreate together? And the answer is yes. Once we release ourselves from a European worldview that causes us to cannibalize ourselves and each other, right, we can think about what a ritual of reclamation, one that is co created and continuously recreated in community with our ancestors, in community with our spirit guides, in community with each other. We can think about what that really looks like. And we'll do that by looking at Audre Lorde's process in the Cancer Journals. Huh. Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals, which were published in 1980, provides a glimpse into her life and her work after her mastectomy. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and this just powerful, impactful work, and as you can see, I've read up and down and through it, pulls the reader into her Black lesbian poet, warrior mother's emotional world with the express purpose of turning the pain, faith, labor, and loving of that time into strength for other women. Her love for women compels her not to wallow in her pain, but to give her pain purpose. And she details the uniquely Black lesbian experiences that she has with white doctors, the uniquely Black experiences she has with her family. And the Cancer Journals provide an intimate look into her own battle with death while serving as a grounded, comprehensive Black feminist guide to the affective labor that Black women undertake for survival. We come to understand how pain, faith, labor, and loving becomes translated into strength through excerpts from Lord's journal entries. And, I read from my journal today, so I felt like I was channeling her a little bit. Her essays, her speeches, as she transforms into the woman that neither she nor the world has seen before. She speaks to the condition of Black women, Black lesbian women in particular, and to the undertaking of survival in an anti-Black world. And she says, I have found that battling despair does not mean closing my eyes to the enormity of the task of effecting change, nor ignoring the strength and the barbarity of the forces aligned against us. It means teaching, surviving, and fighting with the most important resource I have, myself, and taking joy in that battle. It means for me, recognizing the enemy outside and the enemy within, and knowing that my work is part of a continuum of women's work, of reclaiming this earth in our power, and knowing that this work did not begin with my birth, nor will it end with my death. And it means knowing that within this continuum, my life and my love and my work has particular power and meaning relative to others. And so, Lord transports us into this world and this time in her life, in the aftermath of facing cancer that was death dealing and disabling for her. She really talks a lot about the decision to remove her breast and the pain that it caused her, the dysphoria that it caused her. But we see Lord really struggle with this in the cancer journals. And through that struggle, she comes to a place where she recognizes that her life is worth living by any means necessary, that her voice and her feelings, her struggles are things that have to be shared, whether she likes it or not, because she aims to survive. She says, literally on page 1, quote, "I am a post mastectomy woman who believes our feelings need voice in order to be recognized, respected, and of use. I do not wish my anger and pain and fear about cancer to fossilize into yet another silence, nor to rob me of what strength can lie at the core of this experience, openly acknowledged and examined. For other women of all ages, colors, and sexual identities who have recognized that imposed silence about any area of our lives is a tool for separation and powerlessness. And for myself, I have come to voice some of my feelings and thoughts about the travesty of prosthesis, the pain of amputation, the function of cancer in a profit economy, my confrontation with mortality, and the strength of women loving, and the power and rewards of self conscious living." So she churns all of this wisdom, right, around these things through her experience of facing and dealing with. Instead of allowing cancer to silence her, to relegate her to a space where she does not speak to others, does not interact with others, she aims to find the strength in her experience to translate and to share that with other women. Here we are, decades later, relying on her strength in situations that have nothing to do with cancer itself. But her aim, which she says on page 2, is to integrate this crisis into useful strengths for change. And she talks about this experience solely from the self. And this is important for us to hold, right? Particularly for those of us who are in battles for our lives right now. To sit with the truth that it is okay for us to be, as Lord would call, completely self referenced right now. It is okay for you to know and to understand your experience through your literal body and experience. You don't have to map your pain through nothing and nobody else. You don't got to outsource it to TikTok. You don't got to outsource it through YouTube. You don't got to do nothing else but to sit in your body and in yourself. And Lord gives an explanation for this. She says, "And yes, I am completely self referenced right now because it is the only translation I can trust. And I do believe not until every woman traces her weave back strand by self referenced strand will we begin to alter the whole pattern." This pattern that she refers to is that denial of pain that is often asked of women, particularly those who are suffering. In this work, Lord openly names her suffering. She openly names her journey with reconciling with death as an inevitability. And she says quite beautifully, quote, I am not supposed to exist. I carry death around in my body like a condemnation, but I do live. The bee flies. There must be some way to integrate death into living, neither ignoring it nor giving into it. And this becomes the key for her. Once she stops resisting the death that she knows is the natural end of life, she then begins to use that understanding of death to help her create a ritual and a process for living and to name that process. She talks about thinking about the future and about life with death as an ally and a companion. When she integrates her death into living, her sense of what's possible for her future, for the present, and even the way she looks at the past changes. But she says, my visions of a future I can create have been honed by the lessons of my limitations. Now, I wish to give form with honesty and precision to the pain, faith, labor, and loving which this period of my life has translated into strength for me. In this period of her life, she experienced many emotions. She talks openly about the fear and the rage she experiences being in those hospital rooms with those racist ass bitches treating her, the rage she feels when the Breast Cancer Association comes to her again and again, begging her to take up a prosthetic breast so that she can appear to be a quote unquote healthy and normal woman, that fear of facing cancer and the unknown, where even the sacrifice of her right breast doesn't guarantee that she'll survive. So she talks about that fear openly and what's inspirational about her discussion of fear, particularly for someone like me, where fear and anxiety can inhibit me from movement, can inhibit me from pursuing my purpose, or at least it has in the past. And I'm, again, through this ritual and through this process, learning how to move through it. What I find inspirational is how she talks about fear and taking up fear and putting it to work. And she says, sometimes fear stalks me like another malignancy, sapping energy and power and attention from my work. Which I've been there, girl. A cold becomes sinister, a cough, lung cancer, a bruise, leukemia. Those fears are most powerful when they are not given voice, and close up their heels comes the fury I cannot shake them. I am learning to live beyond fear by living through it, and in the process, learning to turn fury at my own limitations into some more creative energy. I realize that if I wait until I am no longer afraid to act, write, speak, be, I'll be sending messages on a Ouija board, cryptic complaints from the other side. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, it becomes less important whether or not I am afraid. I had to remind myself that I had lived through it all already. I had known the pain and survived it. It only remained for me to give it voice, to share it for use, that the pain not be wasted. The idea of making pain useful was something that appealed to me because, as someone who's experienced a lot of pain in life, and allowing it to serve a purpose beyond sitting in my body as a result of whatever affliction or experience that I'd gone through. And for so many of us who do healing work, who do work in community, right, we use our pain and our experiences of oppression to fuel us in the work that we do. And so, mm, and so we might understand this to be a kind of spiritual discipline or practice that we do. We have our pain, we feel it. We allow it to come, right? We don't refuse that pain. But then we also find ways to channel it into our creative work, creative power to make something from that pain so that it not be wasted. This is different from some spiritual practices that would tell us to bypass pain, that said that pain has no use. We should not feel it. Through this process, Lord also learned about what it meant to, as she said, integrate death into living. And she talks about living with death as a guide. The quote, that sharp awareness engendered by the full possibility of any given chance and moment. For me, that means being not ready for death, but able to get ready instantly and always to balance the I wants with the I haves. I'm learning to speak my pieces, to inject into the living world my convictions of what is necessary and what I think is important without concern of the enervating kind, for whether or not it is understood, tolerated, correct, or heard before. Although, of course, being incorrect is always the hardest, but even that is becoming less important. The world will not stop if I make a mistake. And so, as she makes her wants and needs and has known, using death as a guide, she also wrote in her journals, wrote these essays, wrote these speeches with the idea that folks would do ritual with it. I do work with it. She has a really interesting foresight into the purpose of this work in advance of it being published. She says, I am writing this now in a new year, recalling, trying to piece together that chunk of my recent past so that I or anyone else in need or desire can dip into it at will if necessary to find the ingredients with which to build a wider construct. That is an important function of the telling of experience. Through sharing her experience, she's able to give us a map, a guide, an understanding, and to building a wider construct or understanding for our own experience. I think that is one of Audre Lorde's gifts as a writer. One of the things that then from her experience we're able to glean is just how important community and connection is for survival and the truth telling, right, within that community and connection. And so she says, I am talking here about the need for every woman to live a considered life. The necessity for that consideration grows and deepens as one faces directly one's own mortality and death. Self scrutiny and an evaluation of our lives, while painful, can be rewarding and strengthening journeys towards a deeper self. For as we open ourselves more and more to the genuine conditions of our lives, women become less and less willing to tolerate those conditions unaltered or to passively accept external and destructive controls over our lives and our identities. Any short circuiting of this quest for self definition and power, however well meaning and under whatever guise, must be seen as damaging, for it keeps the post mastectomy woman in a position of perpetual and secret insufficiency, infantilized and dependent for her identity upon an external definition by appearance. In this way, women are kept from expressing the power of our knowledge and experience, and through that expression, developing strengths that challenge those structures within our lives that support the cancer establishment. And so we can glean from some of this that Lord imagines the primary audience for this book to be other breast cancer warriors, other folks who are living with breast cancer or have survived breast cancer and may have made the choice to have a mastectomy. I wonder if she ever imagined that this work would serve me or other women, other folks who are looking for wisdom on how to survive even in the face of life that lives unlivable and untenable. In some ways, I have to credit her for that, right? She's an intelligent woman. Of course, she thought of this. What I find to be also interesting in this bit of wisdom that she shared is she talks about self definition and power being a quest that can be short circuited. And part of what makes, I know for me, the journey of knowing and learning myself, of holding on to my life with righteous certainty, one was me turn around, look around everywhere I look, comparing my life to others and thinking that I was in some way falling short because my life did not look the way I wanted it to look. I wasn't having the same kind of success that others had at things that I felt like I used to be relatively successful in. An inordinate amount of rejection and failure. And the short circuiting of my quest, me handing off the value and the purpose of my life to be defined by others' successes. The short circuiting of this quest could also be handing your destiny off to a God that requires you to be lesser so that they might be greater under the guise of salvation. The short circuiting of the quest of self definition and power might be handing your destiny and yourself over to your mother so that she may define you, so that relationships define you under the guise of being a good daughter, or to friends under the guise of showing up for community, unto organizations under the guise of doing liberation by any means necessary, including martyrdom and self sacrifice. It might even be, right? Observing folks on social media, observing people on TV and saying, yeah, why is my life not like this? Why can't I be more like insert person here? And so in this journey of reclamation, in reclaiming our lives and living in our destinies, we must not be too quick to look for the convenient solutions that are present in some institutions and social circles. We have to define ourselves for ourselves. And that can be a really grueling process. For Lorde, it was about reclaiming her life, taking her life back from the image, the being, the status, the state of being a victim of cancer. And she says, I refuse to be reduced in my own eyes or in the eyes of others from warrior to mere victim, simply because it might render me a fraction more acceptable or less dangerous to the still complacent, those who believe if you cover up a problem, it ceases to exist. I refuse to hide my body simply because it might make a woman phobic world more comfortable. And in this instance, she was particularly talking about the prosthesis that they kept trying to offer her for her breast and the refusal to take up this whitened notion of a victim through the loss of a body part that was holding something that was killing her. And so, by refusing this paradigm of victim, she turns to warrior as a way to be more dangerous, as a way to defy patriarchy and misogyny. She says, I don't have to conform to your understanding of what a woman looks like. I don't got to be a two breasted person to be a woman. She talks about the postures of victimhood that typically result in a kind of silence and invisibility. And she refuses that. She says, in quote, for silence and invisibility go hand in hand with powerlessness. By accepting the mask of prosthesis, one breasted women proclaim ourselves as insufficient, dependent upon pretense. We reinforce our own isolation and invisibility from each other, as well as the false complacency of a society which would rather not face the results of his own insanities. In addition, we withhold that visibility and support from one another, which is an aid to perspective and self acceptance. Surrounded by other women day by day, all of whom appear to have two breasts, it is very difficult sometimes to remember that I am not alone. Yet once I face death as a life process, what is there possibly left for me to fear? Who can ever really have power over me again? It was very important for me after my mastectomy to develop and to encourage my own internal sense of power. I needed to rally my energies in such a way as to image myself as a fighter rather than as a passive victim suffering. At all times, it felt crucial to me that I make a conscious commitment to survival. It is physically important for me to be loving my life rather than to be mourning my breast. I believe that it is this love of my life and myself and the careful tending of that love which has been done by women who love and support me. But a clear distinction must be made between this affirmation of self and the superficial farce of looking on the bright side of things. Like superficial spirituality, looking on the bright side of things is a euphemism used for obscuring certain realities of life, the open consideration of which might prove threatening or dangerous to the status quo. So, in this, Lord is telling us multiple things that I think are important to mark. She's saying that in the face of this death, in the face of this loss, it became life giving for her to develop and encourage her own sense of power within herself. She recognized that no one was going to come down or come in the hospital room and save her. So she had to image herself, see herself as a fighter rather than a victim. She made a conscious commitment to survive. That is an act of devotion, if I would say so myself, right? To survival and to her life. She said it was physically important for her to love her life rather than to mourn her breast. And I've talked about this in other places, but when we imagine loss to be something that is life ending, what might save us is simply going to where the love is. And so when I read this, I was like, not me and Audre Lorde being on the same page. She goes on after this to talk about the spiritual bypassing that occurs in a lot of chronic illness and other forms of illness community where folks say, you have this illness or you have this experience because you don't have enough joy or happiness in your life. Lorde, in her experience, even had doctors telling her that, yeah, people got cancer because they weren't happy enough, which Lorde names as a sense of guilt making and victim blaming. It is a form of spiritual bypassing that is a big part of what I would say is New Age spirituality, right? This idea that you can emote yourself out of certain sicknesses and thus must stay away from quote unquote negative emotions like fear, anger, anxiety, etc., because those could bring on different diseases. People will look at Black Death, they'll look at other forms of violence and say, well, we still got to prioritize our joy. If we don't, we will be just as bad as those who, kill us. We will succumb to what our oppressors want for us. And Lorde is very, very real. Lorde very much clearly confronts this. She's shooting from the hip with this one when she says, it does nothing to encourage the mobilization of our psychic defenses against the very real forms of death which surround us. It is easier to demand happiness than to clean up the environment. The acceptance of illusion and appearance as reality is another symptom of this same refusal to examine the realities of our lives. Let us seek joy rather than real food and clean air and a saner future on a livable earth. as if happiness alone can protect us from the results of profit madness. Was I wrong to be working so hard against the oppressions afflicting women and Black people? Was I in error to be speaking out against our silent passivity and the cynicism of a mechanized and inhuman civilization that is destroying our earth and those who live upon it? Was I really fighting this spread of radiation, racism, woman slaughter, chemical invasion of our food, pollution of our environment, the abuse and psychic destruction of our young, merely to avoid dealing with my first and greatest responsibility? To be happy? In this disastrous time, when little girls are still being stitched shut between their legs, when victims of cancer are urged to court more cancer in order to be attractive to men, when 12-year-old Black boys are shot down in the street at random by uniformed men who are cleared of any wrongdoing, when ancient and honorable citizens scavenge for food in garbage pails, and the growing answer to all this is media hype or surgical lobotomy. When daily gruesome murders of women from coast to coast no longer warrant mention in the New York Times. When grants to teach disabled children are cut in favor of more billion-dollar airplanes. When 900 people commit mass suicide rather than face life in America, and we are told it is the job of the poor to stem inflation, what depraved monster could possibly be always happy? The only really happy people I have ever met are those of us who work against these deaths with all the energy of our living, recognizing the deep and fundamental unhappiness with which we are surrounded, at the same time as we fight to keep from being submerged by it. The idea that happiness can insulate us against the results of our environmental madness is a rumor circulated by our enemies to destroy us. And what woman of color in America over the age of 15 does not live with the knowledge that our daily lives are stitched with violence and with hatred? And to naively ignore that reality can mean destruction. We are equally destroyed by false happiness and false breasts, and the passive acceptance of false values which corrupt our lives and distort our experience. And so, sitting with this rejection of a false happiness, one that is spurred by that European worldview, if we recall, that detachment from spirit that turns people, land, etc., into property, into territory, into material, that then allows one to have this false sense of happiness in a world of suffering. She turns to despair, in a sense, and leaves us here. Maybe this is the chance to live and speak those things I really do believe. That power comes from moving into whatever I fear most that cannot be avoided. But will I ever be strong enough again to open my mouth and not have a cry of raw pain leap out? I think I was fighting the devil of despair within myself for my own soul. We are living in times in which we might not feel strong enough to open our mouths and not have a cry of raw pain leap out. But Lord talks about in her work the process, the rituals that she went through in order to gather this strength to fight for her soul and her life. And so, in our last segment for today, we'll wrap up with really thinking about that process. If we are to follow Lord's example, to move ourselves towards our own self determination, to deepen our own sense of power, we must embrace what she names is our pain, faith, labor, and loving. And allowing our pain, faith, labor, and loving to be the force that transforms us from a victim of our circumstances, a victim of our conditions, a victim of our world, into a warrior, into a form of ourselves that neither we nor the world has seen before. We understand that to be our task and our ancestral mandate. That is the labor of survival as Black people. But we must recognize our own sovereignty first, rather than waiting for others to recognize our sovereignty and then say, oh, yeah, yeah, we do have it. And I think, if we look at our movements, the civil rights movement was not trying to do that. And neither was the Black Power movement doing that to a degree. Black Lives Matter, absolutely not, right? Black Lives Matter is declaring that to who? Not to us. We know our lives matter, right? So throwing a recognition of our sovereignty to those killing us and then wondering why they can so easily take it away during COVID lockdown and afterwards. And so we must reclaim our own feelings and starting there as a space of establishing our own sovereignty over our lives, allowing us to establish self determination. And Audre Lorde talks about this at the end of the Cancer Journals when she says, I alone own my feelings. I can never lose that feeling because I own it, because it comes out of myself. I can attach it anywhere I want to because my feelings are a part of me, my sorrow and my joy. I would have never chosen this path, but I am very glad to be who I am here. And so, in owning her feelings and owning this journey, in moving through her own ritual and process of pain, faith, labor, and loving, Lord transforms this battle of breast cancer and facing her own mortality into the wisdom that is the speech and essay of the transformation of silence into language and action. And she says that by recognizing the source of power as being within herself, that allowed her to refuse silence and fear. It allowed her to put that fear into a perspective that actually gave her courage and strength. And she talks about fear as not being the proper reason to remain silent. She says, quote, we sit in our corners mute forever while our sisters and ourselves are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit in our safe corners mute as bottles, and we still will be no less afraid. And so, in this understanding of fear as not being the proper reason to remain silent, it can actually be something that contributes to our strength. We also have the duty as we transform from silence into language and action to establish and examine our role in that transformation and to see ourselves as vital in a collective transformation from silence into language and action. Our purpose to live a life robustly, to live life abundantly, to be seen and heard and known, and recognize that as being vital to the transformation of this earth and this world. She also discusses transforming that fear of death into something else entirely. She has this really interesting notion where she actually names death as an ally to living. By facing her own mortality, she realizes, well, fuck, I gotta do what I gotta do. I gotta do what I gotta do. My mortality is here, it's in front of me. It's telling me, whether I speak or not, bitch, you gonna die. And so she says, quote, if I do what I need to do because I want to do it, it will matter less when death comes because it will have been an ally that spurred me on. And so as we think about what it is that we need to do and do it from a place of desire, understanding that death will meet us. And yes, in our ancestral understanding of death, we have another lifetime, we have another opportunity. But we can accomplish what we came here to do in this one as well, right? We can allow death to be an ally, something that we don't have to fear, like those who subscribe to a certain kind of European Christian worldview. For me, at this juncture of my life, I am learning how to not let the myriad of challenges that I clearly signed up for. I clearly said, Okay. I'm going to be the strongest soldier. Here, God. I get it. I get it. I get it, girl. I'm going to be the strongest soldier. Then for me, it is truly a matter of allowing my challenges or not allowing my challenges to consume me or to stun me into silence. Even as my family abandons me, even as I face hardship after hardship, I can choose to survive. That is what is required of me by my ancestors. That's what makes their sacrifice worthy, but also ensures that I'm living in my purpose. To be fucking for real, like, I don't think I've ever had to fight this hard for my fucking life. Like, and I grew up homeless and bullied and like just poor, like poor. Then survival was just a matter of fact, a matter of like, I don't know, the adults in my community coming together to ensure that it happened because I was a child and they did what they could. And yeah, I paid the cost of that, probably emotionally and psychologically. But now that it's up to me, make sure that I make it from day to day. Fuck, this shit is hard. And yeah, it's fucking hard. And this time has highlighted so much for me. It's given me insight on why Christianity is so popular. Like it literally it's alluring. It's alluring to give away the responsibility of your survival and your responsibility to your ancestors and your responsibility to the earth. And to say, yeah, no, I don't got that shit. I'm gonna get that shit all up to all knowing and all powerful Sky Daddy. Taking responsibility for one's good life and the earth is exhausting under capitalism. And so through this exhaustion, through this pain, like through this moment is here where I try to offer a way forward that does not excuse the pain, does not say suck it up. We're not spiritually bypassing here. Like shit fucking sucks. Like we're not gonna bypass that. We're not gonna obscure that. We're not going to reach for a false optimism. We're not gonna reach for hope that is based in delusion. We're going to embark upon the work of examining our pain, faith, labor, and loving with self compassion, with grace, and with ruthless self devotion, to turn that into strength and to turn that into world building materials for ourselves and others. And we're doing this in the way that our ancestors did, right? Through sacred ritual. So let's begin. The first thing that we'll do is examine our pain. What this looks like is not a woe is me. It's not a posture of self pity. It's not a posture of, yeah, really fully subscribing to the scripts that our families, institutions, teachers, lovers, racist ass bitches might have given us. It is looking at our own lives, going back to that sense of being self referenced, looking at our lives honestly and asking ourselves, where am I hurting? Where is that pain sitting in my body? Where does that pain coalesce and swirl around in my life? Then we acknowledge the pain. We let that pain break our hearts. So much of what folks tend to do to quote unquote survive, right, is actually try to prevent themselves from feeling heartbreak and pain. But heartbreak is not all bad. It's a sign that you are living and that you're in tune with yourself, your emotions, and your body. The experience of pain is pain, but it's a signal of life. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but heartbreak in particular is the way that our heart expands. When we resist feeling our heartbreak fully and deeply, we walk around with hearts that, bursting out like, oh, they got some cracks in them. Our hearts are holding on for dear life. They might be a little, you know, look, got some fractures in them. That's the word I'm looking for. And if we don't allow our hearts to break so that they can be rebuilt and expanded, then we have these hearts with these little fractures, these fissures in them. And imagine how small a person has to be in order to fit through the cracks in your heart. And so, for those of us who are refusing our pain and wondering why we find ourselves entrapped in cycles with people who embody the same kind of harmful practices towards us, most likely it's because we have refused to turn towards our pain. To change and to chart anew, you must resist the urge to turn away from yourself. And yes, your pain is you too. It is Christianity that tells us that pain is not our portion. It is a white supremacist view of the world to create a world in which your privilege and your power prevents you from experiencing loss and grief and pain. That is what they're after. They're after not life, but a refusal of life, a mechanization of life, a materialization of life. But an indigenous understanding of life, an African indigenous understanding of life, is one of balance, pain, and pleasure. Audre Lorde says this a bit differently. She says, I must let this pain flow through me and pass on. If I resist or try to stop it, it will detonate inside me, shatter me, splatter my pieces against every wall and person that I touch. We've sat with the pain, we've examined it, we know where it is, where it sits in our bodies, we know its source. We might even know why it's there. We want to turn to our faith. And no, I'm not talking about the churchy kind, not the kind you'll find in the book of Matthew or wherever it is they talk about that mustard seed. I'm talking about the unshakable beliefs that you hold about yourself in your life that spurn your survival. What are the unshakable beliefs that you hold to pursue the good life that your Ori and your ancestors have promised you? You might say, right, this belief feels something like, I move in alignment with my destiny because that is where my abundance flows. So many of us are seeking abundance these days. It seems to be one of the buzzwords. It is definitely the word for my 30 year of life, for sure. And I came across this definition of abundance that really shifted my mind frame around what it can look like outside of materialistic and a European worldview. And so I will share that definition with you. It was shown to me by a delightful comrade, Alana C. Morris. And Alana defines abundance as the place, space, time, state, and being where I no longer self abandon to meet my needs. And so think about your faith as that practice of moving to that abundant place, space, time, state, being where you no longer have to self abandon to meet your needs, to know yourself, to love yourself. Take some time to journal about what you believe to be true about the sanctity of your living and your being. And if you find that you're in a place where you can't name that for yourself, call someone you trust and ask them, what would you say is good about my being here? What good do I bring to life? What is the good that you see in me? And if they're truly, truly about you, that person will be able to name things beyond what you do for them or for others. They'll truly be able to speak about the character of your being here. And honey, if they can't do that, ask somebody else. After you've gathered the materials of your faith, you've sat in your pain, you want to look at your labor. We could think about labor as not just, physical work, right? but literally where you're putting your time and energy, your mental capacity. That is your labor. You might ask yourself, where have I been handing my life to others? Where have I been hoping that tending to anything but myself would save me? For some of us, that is our job. Or if I work hard enough, I'll make enough, and then I don't have to tend to XYZ in my life. If I give enough time to my friends, I won't have to tend to my own life. If I give enough time to this organization, I won't have to tend to my own life. You're placing your labor outside yourself. Who have I been trying to save in hopes that someone else will save me? Once you've thought about that, those spaces where you're putting your labor, you're misdirecting your energy, where you can't find no evidence of the goodness of your life because you've given the goodness of your life to those places, then you can return to a practice of ruthless self devotion. What would it mean for me to act with righteous certainty that my life is sacred and disconnect myself from anything that would say otherwise? Any practices that would say otherwise? How could that practice save you right here and right now? For some of us, that might even be simply trusting that even if we're not there to do all the work all the time, there's an abundance in the universe present where other folks can step up and take responsibility in those spaces. Last but certainly not least, you want to look at your loving. You might make a list of who and what you love. Be sure to put your name at the top of that list. And in thinking about your loving, you might want to hearken back to Audre Lorde's words about consideration. You might want to hearken back to what we know to be true about African spiritual practice and understanding of reciprocity. The natural world, outside of a European distortion of it, is reciprocal, not extractive. So go through the list and name the ways you consider each person and thing that you name. You also want to go back through that list and name how they consider you. And if there are folks on the list whom you consider but who don't consider you, think about what you want from that relationship. Is that a relationship that you need to maintain or hold in a particular kind of esteem? Do you need to rearrange some folks in your life, like reposition them? And perhaps you might shift that relationship so that it reflects more of that energy, that labor, and that love that you put into it. You might have to let some folks go, which is hard to do at the end of the world. As you're doing this work, hold on to this truth. Love is a force that insulates us from the chaos of this world. If your loving of yourself and others is not providing some shelter from the fuck shit of everything, then it might not be love at all, but an unhealthy attachment. At the end of this ritual, right, you've sat with your pain, you've garnered your faith, you've examined your labor, you've looked at your loving. You always want to return back to you, return back to affirming yourself and your destiny. You do this work to survive. That is all that is required of you, is to survive in your purpose and your power, to have a robust life that is in alignment with your destiny. You don't got to carry nothing or nobody that ain't yours now. You can let that go. And so we seal this work, this ritual, with an affirmation. I reclaim my life and my destiny through tending to my pain, faith, labor, and loving. I recognize that I deserve a good life filled with purpose, joy, and abundance. So every action I make aligns me with my good life and my good destiny. I won't lay my destiny at my enemy's feet. That is all I have for y'all today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope this episode helps you gather the strength you need to choose your life and to survive. We need you in this moment. As always, I want to express my deepest gratitude to my elevated ancestors and spirit guides, to the Most High God for giving me the inspiration and the fortitude to do this work. I do not take it lightly, and lately, it's been saving my life. If you would like to join the Black Love Free project team as we're doing all these new exciting things, please reach out to us via email at black.loved.free podcast@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram. We are looking for someone who is organized and passionate about Black feminism, anarchy, and resistance to help us with our internal operations and administration. So if that's you, holla at us, okay? If you would like to keep up with future episodes, please follow us on Instagram at black.loved.free. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page and come find us on Patreon. The link is in the description box if you're really trying to keep up with it. Be sure to give us 5 stars and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps us reach other listeners. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave us a comment to let us know what you think about the episode. If this episode touched you or made you think about something differently, feel free to send us an email. Lastly, may you find a sacred, soft place to care for yourself and for each other. May you radiate in the truth that you are the one who saves you. And may you find the strength to be Black, loved, and free. Until next time, bye.